Delilah. Welcome to my podcast, Knit Next to You. Today I wanted to discuss 23 things that I learned in 2023. As many of you all know, I was pregnant for the entire year, what it feels like the whole entire year, but I picked up knitting in October, and so from 2023, I would say like October to December, there are 23 things that I made note of that I'd like to share with you. Number one, I have shared my knitting journey with a lot of my friends and family, and so many people say, oh, I can't do that. I cannot knit. And I wanted to say, yes, you can. If you have a desire to learn how to knit, you can knit. Number two, what you need to do to learn how to knit is you need needles, you need yarn, and you need a pattern. What does a pattern do for you? It actually walks you step by step on how to knit that particular object or project that you want to knit. Number three, it is fun and it is relaxing. One of the biggest things that I have found with knitting is how relaxing it is. I compare it to beating a car with a bat, but in the most gentle way. I haven't really done that in my personal life, but perhaps at a fall festival or a fair, there are some events where you can pay and beat a car with a bat. But for me, knitting releases that stress, that anxiety, or if I'm worried about something, I often find myself knitting shortly after that, or I'll take some time away and knit for a little bit. Number four, this hobby is mobile. I actually am traveling with a bag and my cinema sweater. If you can see in here, it's cozy in there, but it is a mobile hobby, and that's one thing I love the most. I have a knitting bag in my car. This is one I carry with me to and from work, and that's the one I'm primarily focusing on. So this project or this hobby is mobile. Number five, it's functional and practical. It is cold here in Florida, so you can wear a beanie, you can wear a scarf, you can wear a shawl. So knitting is both relaxing and it is functional and practical. Number six, it's personal. One thing I enjoy about this is that it challenges me with the different techniques, the different patterns. You can actually make your whole wardrobe out of knitting. You can make your own, I think they call it t-shirts, but they're actually sweatshirts or short sleeves. You can make your own pants. I've even seen people make shorts and socks and gloves. You can knit your entire wardrobe, and I think that's amazing. Number seven, it's easy to let your emotions override logic. And the reason why I say that is because I am absolutely obsessed with yarn. And I would find any excuse to go to our local boutique here called Knitcessities or to Joann's or Michael's to buy more yarn. I don't need more yarn, but I love to buy more yarn. So I'm actually challenging myself this year to knit from the yarn stash that I already have. I have a lot of one skeins. I actually have a set of sweater quantity cotton yarn that I'm not too crazy about. So I'm trying to find a project that gets me excited to knit so that I can use the cotton yarn. But otherwise, you can often get excited about yarn and needles and all of these things, and you have just enough in your home. Number eight, there is a large knitting community. I did not know what I was walking into when I started this hobby. There is knit groups everywhere. In fact, my church, and I'm a part of this one, it's called Knitted Together. It's a connect group where a group of us ladies, and it can be gentlemen as well, that go to Starbucks on a Saturday at 8 a.m. so we can just knit and have coffee. I enjoy doing that. Oftentimes, if I get to leave work early, I'll go to the Starbucks or a coffee shop near me, and I will sit, have coffee, and knit. Or oftentimes I come here to my friend's house and knit, and while she does other things around the house. And number nine, storage. It doesn't require a huge storage. Well, it depends on if you do have a lot of yarn. If you have a lot of yarn, you'll need bigger storage. But for me, I have a small apartment and I don't have enough space to store all of the yarn that I can store. So at this time, I do have a small storage for that, and I will pop up a picture so that you can see what it looks like. Okay, now those were 9 general things that I learned in 2023. I wanted to get a little bit more specific on yarn. I have 3 things that I've learned about yarn, and then we'll go into the needles and the patterns. All right, for yarn, I believe this would be number 10. The texture of the yarn adds to the experience of knitting. So for example, right now I have 2 strands of wool and 1 strand of mohair here in my cinema sweater. The texture of this yarn is absolutely gorgeous, and I would even say delicious, but it's soft and squishy, and of course it's going to be warm. So the texture of the fabric that you are knitting together adds to the experience. If you feel like the yarn is itchy and scratchy and you don't like the color, it's going to give you a bit of an adverse experience. You wouldn't really enjoy it. So I'm loving my knitting experience for the cinema sweater, and primarily because of the yarn that I'm using and the texture that it's creating. Number 12, I believe 11, the different weights of yarn. Now, I've shared in a previous video the different weights of yarn, but let me go through this one more time. The 2 strands that I'm using for the cinema sweater, this is a number 3 weight, and then this is a lace weight, and this is the mohair that I'm using for my sweater. So this is a number 1, and this is a number 3, and you can see the different weights of the sweater, and it adds to the experience, to the knitting experience altogether. So I am knitting, as you can see here, with 3 strands of yarn, and that also makes the project a lot more fun to work with. Okay, 9, 10, 11, 12. Prices vary with your yarn. The acrylic yarns, the synthetic yarns are a bit cheaper, or can be a bit cheaper than the wool, more natural yarns. There's cotton yarn, and there are plant-based yarns, but it depends on the process of how you would get the material into the yarn or the string or the strand. But the acrylic yarns tend to be a bit more cost-effective than the wool type yarn. The cinema sweater that I'm working on, it is 100% wool with the silk kid silk mohair. So it is a bit pricier, but when you start knitting, or when you get into knitting, or when you are a part of using this or having this as a hobby, you'll see that there are a price range between that. And stay within what you can afford. A friend of mine often reminds me that I don't need to spend a lot of money on my knitting hobby. I understand, but sometimes it's just really exciting to get your hands on really, really nice material wool. Okay, needles. Find what you can at the local stores, whether it's Joann's, Michael's, or a local yarn shop. Of course, there are different types of needles. There is plastic needles, steel needles, aluminum, wooden. The wooden needles, you could even find it in bamboo and driftwood. One of the things you would find also is the style needle. So you can use circular needles, or you can use the fixed circular needles, and I will post pictures up of those, and then you can have the straight needles where you will knit back and forth. With circular needles, you typically will just knit in the round, and it seems like things go a bit faster than knitting back and forth. When you knit back and forth, you'll knit one row, knit, and the other row purl as you go back and forth. Your piece will continue to grow, or I would say your fabric would grow. Okay, and I did mention the fixed needles. So now on to patterns. Patterns are sold electronically in books and in paper. If you buy an electronic pattern, I do highly recommend and suggest for you to print it. If you are making a sweater, for example, the sweater will come in 5 or 6 different sizes, from small all the way to extra large or double or 2XL. Either way, as you print out your pattern, I suggest you to go through your pattern and circle all of the different details that is according to the size that you wear. For the cinema sweater, it is a larger fitting sweater, so I selected a large just because I didn't want it to be too big. So I went through the pattern and I selected every number of stitches or rounds that I needed to complete for this particular size large in my knitting pattern. Okay, now when it comes to patterns, know what your pattern calls for. I read something somewhere and they mentioned just start knitting. Don't worry about reading your pattern. I'm not a control freak, at least I don't think I am, but when it comes to patterns, I do want to know what techniques I need to learn. For example, with the cinema sweater, I had to make one left and make one right. I didn't know what raglan seams were or how to do these increases that I mentioned. So I've watched several YouTube videos on how to make one left and how to make one right for the raglan seams. I also wanted to share, some knit designers have YouTube videos for my cinema sweater, Kutova Kika or Veronica Lindberg on YouTube here. She has a tutorial on this sweater, and I've often gone back to make sure I'm doing it right, or at least I understand the instructions in her pattern. So take a look at some of the patterns. Maybe that is a determining factor to you if you would download that pattern and if you would have a YouTube video for it. There are some designers who would put a QR code that would link to the video or will refer back to that YouTube video on their pattern. And I think it's amazing that they do that, because oftentimes I get lost in the pattern, like what am I supposed to do? I'll go back to the YouTube video and they tell me specifically the next thing I need to do. Okay, the next one is read the pattern thoroughly, look up techniques that are new to you. I did mention that. Check your gauge. I am pro gauge swatcher. Who's that? I will tell you more in an upcoming video. I do plan to share a little bit more about gauge swatching. A lot of people think it's a waste of time. I think it's probably the cheapest thing, because it would hurt for you to have done all of this and have to pull it apart because it does not fit you. So that's what gauge swatching is. It tells you what kind of material fabric you're gonna make. If your stitches are the same size of what is expected in the pattern. Either way, gauge swatching is always something to do. Okay, trust the designer. I know there has been a beanie or two that I've tried making or I've started going and I'm like, are you sure we knit two together here? I think I'm supposed to knit two together over there. Trust the designer. They have created a piece according to this pattern. They have had test knitters, they've had tech editors, and so there is so much time and practice done for this pattern to be published that absolutely indeed trust the designer. Unless you do want to make modifications to help suit your fit, maybe an extra stitch or two because you'd like a slouchier look, or you want to increase or decrease in different areas so that it's customized to your body shape, then that's fine. But ultimately, by default, trust the designer. Okay, last but not least on the patterns, you can substitute the yarn you choose to use, whether it's your favorite color or your favorite style. There are some people that have allergies to wool, and perhaps they would prefer synthetic. Either way, you can customize your, you can substitute the patterns, what the pattern calls for yarn. For example, Veronica in her pattern calls for a DK weight or two fingering weight yarn. I could have gone with the DK weight on this sweater, but I love the color of this yarn and it was only in fingering. So because of the color and the texture that this would create, I chose two fingering weight yarns. Now you can do the acrylic, but make sure you gauge swatch so that you can see the difference. Size 4, for example, acrylic size 4 worsted weight would be much different than how this would look. However, you can make the modifications appropriately. I do want to plug in here Taylor Earl with Wool Needles and Hands. She has a great video that I would link below that she talks about substituting the yarn and how to go about substituting the yarn in that way. And I believe I read an article on how to do that with which weights that you can switch to, and I will include that here. Okay, now last but not least, my last 3 for the projects. These are the 3 things that I learned about projects in 2023. When it comes to projects, I mentioned this before, it gets exciting to cast on. It's almost like opening up a new box of Amazon or something. It's just exciting to cast on a new project. So Some people cast on one project at a time, see it till it's finished, and then they start a new project. Others have at least 4. Vanessa at Necessities, the boutique here where I live, she has a rule of 4. I tried having a rule of 4, then I ended up having 5 or 6, and then I cast it on the cinema sweater. And with that, I kind of just was like, I'm going to focus on the cinema sweater. I cast it on maybe 3 or 4 projects, but I ripped it out because I really wanted to focus and get this one done. So you can knit more than one project at one time, but just know that if you have 4 or 5 projects, they will take a bit of your attention away from what you really want to get done. If you're okay with that, then so be it. Okay, projects take time. I started the cinema sweater December 2023, the day before Christmas, so Christmas Eve 2023, I knitted the sweater. I am a mom of 2. I do work full time, and so our house is typically busy. I do get to knit often, but not as long as I would like to. So every now and then I might just do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and I'd be able to get some of these rows in, but it has taken me quite a bit of time, and some projects do take time. Now, a little note here, the thinner the yarn, the more time it will take. Or I would say the thinner the yarn, the thinner the needle, the more stitches it requires for you to create a project. Now, if you have a thicker yarn with a thicker needle, that would take a little bit less time than it would with the finer parts. And number 3, one of my favorite things about creating projects is giving them away. I would love to sell all of my pieces, but I'm a giver in a way where I'm excited or proud of a piece that I've made, and someone gives me a compliment. I'm like, do you want it? And oftentimes I give some of these objects away. So I am planning on just putting some beanies on some of my needles to get them out, and perhaps I will charge for them for a small amount, just so that perhaps I can come in and get some more yarn in with what our beanies would cost. So that's it. I know that was super quick, but that was 23 things I learned in 2023, and of course that was probably from October to December. There's so much more in this, but I thought I would just spend a little bit of time on the 23 things that I've learned in 2023, because I did talk about the top 5 tips for beginner knitters, and so this is just more a bit of an informational on this knitting hobby. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like it, go ahead and click a thumbs up or subscribe. I hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.